morning, everybody. Welcome to Easier Said Than Done, webinar series from the Society of Evidence-Based Policing. Today, we're going to be talking about trauma-informed practice, the evidence, the use of it, and what it's like from a practical perspective. And we've got perspectives from our speakers of academia and the practice side, the policing practice side. And I'll ask my speakers to introduce themselves in just a second before we crack on. If you've not been to one of these things before, the rules are pretty simple. It's a fairly informal conversation that we have. We've got a few questions that we've sort of kicked around in pre-meet, but what we really want to do is encourage you as the audience to interact with our speakers, and you can ask them anything you like through the Q&A. My name is Matt Bland. I'm Chief Operating Officer at the Society of Evidence-Based Policing, and I'm going to confess at the start, I know very little about trauma-informed practice. So this is going to be an education for me going into this session as much as anything else. And hopefully some of my naive questions will elicit some interesting responses. I'll ask my colleague, Helen, to introduce herself, because Helen will take over the Q&A for the second part.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Helen Kesrazadeh. I am Head of Engagement here at SEPB, and I'm going to be popping on at the end to put your questions to our two panelists today. So please make sure you add them in the Q&A for us.
Fantastic, thank you, Helen. I'll just ask my two speakers to introduce themselves. Just say a bit about where you're from, what your background is, and your contact with trauma-informed practice, and then we'll launch into the questions. Jane, if I could ask you to go first, please.
My name is Jane Pepper. I'm a former head teacher. I've got 23 years teaching experience across the whole of the northwest of England. When I finished being a head teacher, I decided it would be a really good idea to do a PhD in embedding trauma-informed practice. And have concentrated predominantly on Merseyside because I started working for the Merseyside Violence Reduction Partnership as the education lead originally, and then as the trauma expert, I suppose. I am a Churchill Fellow. I went around America and Norway looking at interventions that were community-based, that were school-based, and were really sort of parenting based, but I've also in training 12,000 people across Merseyside in trauma-informed practice. I've supported over 4,000 police officers, including taking them to organisational level trauma responsive interventions. So that's a little bit about my background.
It's fantastic. It's quite formidable as well. Head teacher, PhD, Churchill Fellow. Okay, Justin, follow that.
Morning, everybody. My name is Justin Srivastava. Up until 20 months ago, I was serving police superintendent in Lancashire, but I've been around a bit. So I've been across 4 forces and worked nationally and internationally. And up until my retirement, I was working for the Lancashire Violence Reduction Network, which is a VRU. For those that are from outside of the UK, violence reduction units look at the underlying drivers of violence, and importantly, one of those is trauma. So I was trauma-informed lead for the Lancashire Violence Reduction Network, and I developed and led on trauma-informed Lancashire, which was a whole systems approach. And not dissimilar to Jane, it still continues to this day. It's trained over 13,000 people, majority face-to-face, and we've now got nearly 30 organisations that have been nationally accredited as trauma-informed in different ways. But nationally and internationally, I also, for up until my retirement for 7 years, I worked for the National Police Chiefs Council, which is the 43 police chiefs of England and Wales coming together, and Scotland and Northern Ireland. And there's lots of portfolios, and one of them was around public health approaches, which is all about prevention. And within that, I was the trauma-informed lead for that portfolio. And then internationally, as you can see behind me on my background, I work for the Global Law Enforcement and Public Health Association. So they bring together internationally policing, law enforcement and public health. And I'm their trauma-informed lead, as well as being on the board and running the trauma-informed special interest group internationally.
So definitely got the right two people here to ask questions about trauma-informed practice and policing. We had a bit of a pre-meet yesterday, and the conversation there sort of took me down so many interesting avenues that I'd like to unpick with you. But I'm going to start with the real basics because I think it's easy to skip over these things. And I think I'm going to ask both of you this question just to sort of test you. But I'll start with you, Jane. What's the definition of trauma-informed practice? And it's not like, what is it to you? What's your experience with that definition?
Oh, blimey. I think we sort of mentioned this yesterday. I am currently doing my second research paper. My first research paper came out in August last year, looking at the impact after 6 months. This second research paper is actually looking at what is trauma-informed practice, because unfortunately there is no one definition. And we find over and over again that some people suggest that trauma-informed practice can be done in a half-day slot, that it can have lots of evidence of impacts, but very little hope. And so I think without a substantial definition, it becomes very wishy-washy what you will get. And you have to be very, very careful, I think, on thinking it's a tick box. It cannot be a tick box. For us, the basic level of trauma-informed practice includes neuroscience, psychology, physiology, the physical reactions to trauma, understanding sensory responses, understanding intergenerational trauma, understanding attachment, adverse childhood experiences and the impact of that. And I think unless you're actually having this rounded approach to trauma, trauma can be a one-off. Trauma can be one incident that happens that actually really resonates within the body. It can be multiple experiences of trauma that actually resonate within the body. And when you're looking for a definition of it, it becomes so difficult. I almost kick myself for having sort of really focused in on the word trauma, because that has connotations as well, as to people not feeling like they want to really engage with it. Nobody wants to be re-traumatized. So I feel like if we sort of try to define it in a set of words, are we talking about it just for policing, or are we talking about it for health? Because you'll find different organizations talk about it completely differently. They want different language that's used. We're very specific in Merseyside. We're trying to meet the 6 trauma-informed principles based on the Hearts programme from 2016. We are trying to embed the practice that actually supports that neurological understanding, that physiological understanding, but encompassing in all of that has to be fear, anxiety, the reactions, self-compassion, understanding of how easy it is to burn out because we can just overstretch ourselves. And all of these can be traumatic experiences. So it's really hard to define. Justin, you give it a go, better than me.
Okay. Well, I mean, hey, internationally and nationally, a lot of people follow what SAMHSA do, which originates from Canada. Department of Health and Social Care tries to define trauma-informed practice using the SAMHSA definition. But Jane's right. The word trauma has lots of different connotations, and it has different connotations to different arenas. So you could have people who hear the word trauma and immediately think of physical trauma. They immediately think of legs or arms hanging off or whatever it might be in a medical setting. So there's something really important about getting the narrative exactly right. But if you start to look at what it means and what it does, you kind of change and reframe that narrative. So they talk about the principles of trauma-informed practice, things like creating psychological and physiological safety, or in other words, if we were doing Maslow, the bottom bit of Maslow's hierarchy of need, creating trust, which is really hard to do, particularly when you've only got a short period of time with somebody. Starting thinking about empowerment, voice and choice. Are you trying to empower people and giving the power back to the person that you're dealing with? Working with that person, they call it collaboration, but it just means working with the person. And then thinking about that individual person's cultural, historical, gender-based needs, whatever they might be. was really important. And all of that takes time, and it takes trusted relationships. If you were boiling it all down, it's about compassion, it's about empathy, it's about kindness, and it's about spending time to build those trusted relationships up with folk.
Well, she's really interesting. I mean, and that's a good launching off point then. I mean, because I suppose there's lots of overlap there with procedural justice and legitimacy approaches, you know, in terms of how you treat people with kindness. But by the sounds of it, there's also an internal process for officers. Jane, you talked about burnout there. So there's sort of two tracks here, and I'll separate them now in the questions that we go into next. When you're sitting down with officers on the half-day training course where you're trying to obviously teach all of these neuroscience and psychology, you know, which is obviously going to be impossible, where's the focus initially? Is it on the person themselves, or is it outside on the people they're dealing with in terms of being informed about trauma?
So I've just changed my background. I don't know if you can see this. I thought I'd encompass those 6 things that Justin was talking about. Absolutely. Unless we learn about the impact of trauma from a personal perspective, the ripple effect doesn't actually happen. And that's what we're after. We're after people understanding on a really deep level, because that changes behaviour. If you just see it as somebody else's problem, actually, there isn't that level of empathy and compassion. We know that 70% of the population at least have experienced at least one trauma. That's from a piece of research out of 24 countries. So it isn't something that's happening to people in other postcodes. It's happening right everywhere where you are. If you look at the impact of adverse childhood experiences, a friend of mine, Professor Zara Quigg, who's the World Health Organizational lead on violence, has recently done a household study in Merseyside specifically. I'm going to talk about Merseyside because obviously that's where I'm working. And the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences in Merseyside is actually much higher than the national population. So when you're looking at the impact of this, it has to be from a personal perspective. Otherwise, people don't have that level of empathy and compassion. But it's also the buy-in. So that's how you get people to understand, oh, actually, maybe I need to listen to this a little bit, because from a public health perspective, you know, I could actually support myself long term. I could improve my outcomes. We throw into the training a whole section on sleep. How many police officers do not have a deep understanding of the impact of sleep on the body? If you want self-compassion, we need to get them sleeping really well, understanding SCARD, sleep circadian rhythm disruption. Because if we don't add these elements in, where's the buy-in? Where's the it matters to me? If we can get we always call them battery packs. So I explain absolutely everything as a battery pack. If you're absolutely cooking on gas and everything's working really, really well, then you've got a really nice green battery pack with all the energy that you could possibly need. If in actual fact you've gone into hypervigilance and you're becoming scared, frustrated, annoyed, angry, your battery pack's absolutely full and there's too much energy in there. If it's flat as a pancake, actually what happens is the dorsal takes over and all of a sudden you start to feel really lethargic and you just can't manage anything, and then there's no chance of compassion for other people because you can't pour from an empty cup. So if we want these battery packs full, if we want people feeling like they can actually manage and they can pour from their cup, then we have to teach them how to actually get their battery pack back up again, which is why it has to be personal. When you are delivering training at that level, you really have to get the buy-in from them. We need them to understand those grounding techniques. We need them to understand how to get that resilience back in themselves. And it's part of this. Actually, resilience is training the workforce to have something to pour from a cup, not to be empty. And that's really where you have to get that buy-in really, really quickly, even if it is only in a short period.
Oh, that's a fabulous explanation. Justin, I just want to pick at your experience as a cop. Cynicism is, you know, abounds, right? Because it's a very difficult job where people have to do shifts and they have to do a lot. You have to go when you're posted. You have to go to the grade one when you're called. how does it go down? You know, because I think I imagine that cops would sort of say, yeah, great, it'd be great to have a full battery, but that just isn't real life. So what's your experiences of taking this into policing and how it's received?
Sure. I mean, hey, it's one of those. The policing is a profession that's full of cynicism, but you tend to find that particularly when you're training police officers, a couple of things happen. The first thing is you'll sometimes go into rooms and you've got what we call serial alarm folders. People who don't want to be there. They're thinking, I've got my own workload to deal with. I've got this, I've got that. Why are you making me do this? You know, are you trying to make me into a social worker? Are you trying to make me into something I never joined the police to be? And then you start talking about some of the things that James just alluded to there, but particularly the neurobiology and the neuroscience. And once you start understanding how the brain works, two things happen, I think. The first one is that police officers in particular, but police staff as well, start to reflect upon their own experiences. And they start to think about, oh, that person I dealt with 3 weeks ago, actually, they were probably having an amygdalic response when I was dealing with them. And perhaps I could have dealt with them differently if I'd understand the neurobiology. So that's the first thing that happens, that you start to reflect on your own professional practice by understanding neurobiology. But the second thing that happens is you start reflecting on yourself. And you start thinking about, you know what, actually, now I understand how the hippocampus works, and how the prefrontal cortex and how the amygdala works. That helps me move away from fight, flight, freeze responses and helps me with my own resilience, helps me with my own coping strategy. And I tell you what, Matt, I wish I'd known it 30 years ago. I absolutely wish I'd known it 30 years ago, because 30 years ago, I would definitely have dealt with people differently. If I'd understood neurobiology, if I'd understood coping strategies, if I'd understood more about well-being, and I'd understand more about grounding techniques, I would definitely dealt with the public differently, but I would have been more compassionate and kind to myself as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think I'm interested to know, Justin, how it came about for you then. What was your entry point to trauma-informed practice as a police officer, and how does that sort of mirror where the entry point would be now?
Sure.
Is it sort of VRU centric, or is there a broader entry path?
No, it was right place, right time, depending on how you look at it. Some people could say it was wrong time. I don't know. I was working as a chief inspector in a town called Blackburn with Darwen, which is a small old mill town in Lancashire. And at the time, Vincent Felitti had done the original ACEs study in America, and they were starting to bring it across to the UK. And if you see any of the work of Mark Bellis and colleagues, they were driving a lot of the ACEs work, and one of the places that they used, one of the first places they used, was Blackburn. And I was talking to the Deputy Director of Public Health, who said to me, Justin, this is the future of policing. Adverse childhood experiences are where you need to be. And I went, no, it's about putting people in jail and enforcement and so on and so forth. And the more I got involved with it, the more I realised that whilst enforcement is important and criminal justice outcomes are important, so is understanding the underlying causes of the causes. And with that comes social determinants like poverty and housing and so on. But it always has some element of trauma, and we only have to have a look at the prison population to see that the elements of trauma that are within the criminal justice, then onto the prison population. So then we started talking, certainly in Lancashire, around adverse childhood experiences, and we started training police officers. And some of you may have seen the ACEs animation. There was 2 versions of it, one with a Blackburn accent and one with a Welsh accent. And the reason for that is Mark Bellis moved from Liverpool John Moores University to Bangor University in Wales. So they had two versions of the same animation. Blackburn have just redone the animation and done an update of the main person in there who was a child and a teenager, and what it's like for them now as an adult. That's literally just been released a couple of months ago. But we then started saying, do you know what? The 10 ACEs are brilliant. They've got a great evidence base to them, but trauma is much wider than that. So there's an awful lot of stuff that we deal with that's traumatic that isn't necessarily an ACE. It isn't necessarily one of the 10 ACEs. So if you look at being a victim of homophobia, racism, sexism, none of those are ACEs in the original 10 ACEs, yet they are traumatic in their own round. So we started talking more about trauma-informed practice, including ACEs. And I know a lot of other areas have started to do the same. So if you go to Wales, for example, they'll talk about TRACE, which is trauma and ACE. And for colleagues on the call, if you just look at the ACE Hub Wales, it has all the resources around what they're doing in Wales. And then we developed Trauma Informed Lancashire. And we started talking about a whole system approach. And the key to that, Matt, I think, was getting all the system leaders into the room in 2018. It took 5 months to get all the diaries lined up, to get the system leaders coming together. We presented about ACEs in Lancashire, we presented about trauma in Lancashire, and we said we need to do something different on a system level, because it's not the responsibility of one agency on their own. It's not the responsibility of one agency without communities or people with lived experience. We need to come together and do it together. And that's where trauma-informed practice changed, I suppose, our way. And then when the violence reduction units came online, we recognised that the underlying drivers of violence often are driven by trauma. So as a result, it was a really good fit for violence reduction units, and all of the 20 violence reduction units in England and Wales, and then the one in Scotland as well, are all doing some form of trauma-informed work as part of their day-to-day work, because they understand to deal with violence, you have to look at the underlying drivers, and to look at the underlying drivers, you cannot ignore trauma.
Oh, blimey, there's so many areas I could take this conversation now. Jane, I'm going to come back to you because I want to zero in on this, trying to get take up for this, if the case for doing trauma-informed practice, and I'll come back just into sort of political context to it, and that you described that challenge, that paradox between lock 'em up and empathy. So I'm going to come back to that. But Joe, we're obviously an evidence-based charity, so I want to just zero in at the moment on the evidence, and just use that as an entry point to the question of why should a strategic leader embrace a trauma-informed approach on the basis of what does research say at the moment about the benefits or the upsides for doing that?
Oh gosh, right. So there's lots and lots of evidence across the board of the impact of trauma-informed practice long term, if you like. For example, people turning up to work because they're actually feeling resilient. We had one group of staff, if you like, who came to one of our Curiosity Champions conferences. So that's the organisational level readiness. And it was just police officers. And we had a police officer who came and told us a story about how, as a group, they really weren't gelling. And so what they did was they actually got a dartboard and came into work early and started socialising with each other to help build that resilience, to help build relationships, to help actually bring people forward and get them to engage a little bit more. It's about cohesion, working collaboratively, working together. Some of the barriers that have come up are things like, for example, people complaining about the environment. When we talk about trauma-informed practice, and this, I think, sort of follows on quite nicely from what Justin was saying, we often talk about the person, or we talk about who they're dealing with the people, but we kind of forget about the environmental issues. Things like, for example, one delegate came back saying that they felt like a battery hen. Just the way that the actual workspaces were so small, they actually resembled being a battery hen. Well, if you're working like that all day, how do you expect to go out and then deal with people in a completely compassionate way? So thinking about a trauma-informed approach doesn't just look at the person, they also look at the environment that they're in, about the reactions of other people to them. So thinking about that sort of hierarchical structure, if you like, not ignoring things like neurodiversity, all of these sort of training fatigue versus connection. How do we actually balance that right? And that's where trauma-informed practice can really help. It can help to create that, to almost fill the gaps that we've got across systems. But what we know with the health consequences, if we don't address it, we've got cardiovascular dysfunction, we've got a real increase in the likelihood of diabetes, of cancers, of anxiety, of autoimmune diseases, because people are putting themselves in that empty cup scenario. Whereas if we fill the cup, what we get is completely different. So the research suggests greater resilience and tolerance to stress and challenges, a sense of safety, security at work, greater employee satisfaction, which reduces turnover rates, work environments conducive to community and teamwork, improved collaboration and communication, the reduction of eliminations of silos, greater diversity, equity and inclusion, successful systems for feedback and organisational improvement, teams with increased creativity, confidence and problem-solving skills, feelings of mutual respect with increased loyalty, and employees who value the opportunity to work within their organisations. Because there's just no reason why not to. Why perpetuate health difficulties when in actual fact you can have all of that, organisations that are actually empowered to change practice as well, and to think about the people that they're dealing with, but also the people they're supporting within the setting, because it has to be at every single level. One of the things that we were really keen to make sure when we were delivering 8 hours of really impactful research-based training was that we didn't just leave people hanging. You can't just finish a course and just go, right, see you later, bye. Actually, there needs to be a whole system for people who are coming after the training and saying, oh, hold on a minute, I'm understanding myself a little bit better now, but I think I need some help with this. So where's the catch-all? Where's the supportive network to actually ensure that we aren't just dumping this knowledge on people without that security net of how we support them long term? So that was one thing I really was proud of in Merseyside, is that we had this supportive network with the occupational health team, working in collaboration with them. I actually had one of the delegates on the course who came up to me after the course and she said, oh, I'm from the occupational health team. And I was like, oh, that's very nice, wonderful. I had no idea beforehand, but she said to me, you've actually changed our practice. You have changed the way that people are walking in and understand themselves. I don't have to do any of that training. It's almost like you've taken away all of that barrier. Now they're coming in and saying, I need this, I need that, I need the other, because they understand themselves way better. So I think we have to think about all of the elements of trauma-informed practice, the environment, think about the employees, think about how we're putting supervisions in, think about it's not just about putting that information in people's heads, it's also about supporting them long term. And then, I mean, I completely agree with everything that Justin said about the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences in the population that are actually in our criminal system, in our prisons. That impact is huge. But are we thinking about the populations who are supporting them? Are we thinking about actually training them to understand it? Because it can't just be for policing. One of the things that I'm really proud of is the fact that we've gone out to 12,000, well, more than that now, but I haven't added it up recently. But we're now going into actually, so in August, we're delivering training for shopkeepers, because actually they're dealing with trauma all day long in the population. We're training librarians, you know what I mean? It's like all the parts of the system actually need to understand trauma-informed practice.
Great, that's great, thank you. So what you're highlighting for me is that this sort of starts inside, you know, an executive leader sort of coming out this thinking, I did warn you in the pre-meeting that my dog might bark. Hopefully you can't hear him in the background. He's decided this is the time. What it sort of says to me is, anybody approaching this from thinking this is going to be a crime reduction pill, we're going to reduce violent crime by doing trauma-informed practice, needs to sort of reframe that and think this starts inside our organisation with our own personnel. That's kind of the clear message I'm getting from you. Justin, just thinking about this from a strategic police lead, you know, a busy police executive who's trying to run their business, got 1,001 different demands. This might be a tough sell to the public, particularly to political leaders who might come at this from a framework of, look, we want boots on the ground, arrest numbers up, you know, this is policing, it's difficult, crack on with it. What what has your experience been of encountering that attitude? How have you navigated that? What's a sort of decent street, or is that old hat? Actually, are we in a different place now?
Mixed, I think, is probably the best way to describe that, Matt. So you'll get different police leaders that will prioritize different things. As in any organization, you're going to get that. There's always going to be crisis demand. There's always going to be demand coming through the front door, whether it's 999 demand coming into us or whatever it might be. But I always, when I'm having this conversation, take people back to 2015. And in 2015, when the College of Policing did their demand modelling work that still continues to this day, we saw that 20% or slightly less of policing demand was around crime. The rest, the 80%, was those calls at 2 o'clock in the morning where policing was often the phone call of choice. And within that, there was an awful lot of vulnerability. And within that vulnerability, there was an awful lot of trauma. So if you were rewinding and talking about it on a business case point of view, your hook to all of this would be prevention and early intervention. Because by recognizing things at a much earlier stage with the folk that we work with, both within our organizations, but our community members as well, we've got a better chance of helping them to help themselves. And if we know that a lot of people that we're going to be dealing with will have trauma, but we also know that a lot of our staff will as well, as an example of that, I think most of the studies show that trauma in people's lives, they have between 6 and 8 big traumatic incidents in their lives. An average police officer will deal with between 600 and 800 traumatic incidents. So if we know that we've got that within our workforce, we want to intervene much early to help our staff to be able to help the community members. But also, if we know that we're dealing with community members that have trauma, then we want to deal with them in the right way so that they don't become our crisis demand of the future. And therefore prevention and early intervention becomes really important, and it comes in different guises. So we might be talking about trauma, we might be talking about contextual safeguarding, we might be talking about other areas like problem solving and so on. All of them are interlinked, and there was a piece of work done by the Department of Health and Social Care that I suppose put a Venn diagram together, looking at all the different ways that we do prevention and bringing it all together, and then looking at the bit in the middle of the Venn diagram. And inevitably you're talking about trauma, but it's not just about policing. This is a multi-agency approach, and if you deal with trauma and ACEs at an early stage, then you're going to have an impact on lung disease and heart disease and obesity and unplanned pregnancy and so on and so forth. So you can't do it in isolation in policing. You've got to do it as a total partnership, and you've got to do it working with community members, and you've got to learn from lived experience, because otherwise, without all of that coming together, so you've got your dog going, Matt, I'm on a blue light route and I've got ambulances going past me. So you've got to do it together. You can't do it with policing on their own.
Yeah. Okay. That's really helpful. All still really tough sell, isn't it? I guess for executives who've got short tenures and immediate objectives to get through. Also, the complexity of this makes it quite hard to study, doesn't it? Quite hard to isolate the impacts. And I think we talked about, in the YEF toolkit, they sort of suggest that the evidence around the link between trauma-informed practice and violence reduction is not well established at the moment, which obviously runs counter to what practitioners are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's probably slightly rooted in how difficult it is to study some of these things in isolation when it's so complex. I'm trying to think, if you're going into an organization, police, let's say police, but obviously accepting that it's multi-agency, and you want to build this from a blank piece of paper, what would and I know we could do a whole lecture on this subject, this question alone, so I'm going to limit you to 3 to 5 things each. What are the things you want to put in place, the key building blocks you want to put in place? Oh, Jane's got a slide for this already, I can see. Yeah, you know where I'm going. What are the key building blocks to put in place at the start, Jane?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to this one. So over this period of 2.5 years where we've been sort of looking at delivery of the training, but then all of the feedback from the training. So we've got now 2.5 years of 6-month feedback. So before the training, doing nationally recognised survey, 6 months after the training, doing a nationally recognised survey to see how much impact it's actually had. And we've got 2.5 years of that currently. If you're going to implement it, and this is what's coming back from the research, you cannot do it just on an individual level, which for us in Merseyside is this 8 hours of in-depth training. And we managed to get that across with the police by making it a hybrid and making 2 of those sessions actually an e-learning package. And then the face-to-face version was done as a hybrid day. That basic 8 hours of training gives individual level understanding. But what's missing is a systemic change, is the change within the systems and the processes that people are going back into. So we created the Trauma Informed Champions Conference with this: how do we actually change practice within organisations? And in that toolkit is actually an assessment tool to see where you're missing, whether it's policy, whether it's practice, whether it's how you're meeting people, greeting people, the language that you're using, because language is key. Language can de-escalate a situation really quickly, or it can escalate a situation really quickly. Understanding of body language, understanding of how we're coming across. Only 7% of what I say you're actually going to listen to. The rest of it is in my facial expressions and it's in my body language. So the more you understand of that, the more you can de-escalate situations really quickly. So it's all of these layers. Then we've got the wraparound support. As Justin said before, you can't just do it in isolation. You can't expect, for example, we deliver this training as whole school. I go in, I deliver to everybody. I want the reception staff, I want the kitchen staff, I want everybody with the same level of understanding, because every single person is coming across those kids every day. But what's the purpose of doing it within the school if actually I'm not supporting the parents who are delivering the children to that school? So the wraparound support has to include parenting training. That we've currently got 77 parent trainers going out and delivering 6 weeks free parenting courses, because as Justin said, it's got to be in that early intervention stage. The earlier we get people, the more prevention we are doing in the long term, the more we're changing systems for that public health approach. So just like that with the policing, it has to be the wraparound support of all of the agencies that work within the police. I had one gentleman who came up to me after the training and he said, we keep on going out to the same care home. We're being blue lighted to this care home again and again and again for the same children. Why are the care home staff not being trained in trauma-informed approaches? Why are they escalating situations so that children are then arrested? And actually, if the system doesn't work, it just puts way too much emphasis on one part of the system and it becomes totally imbalanced. So it has to be this gradual approach of train the people the level of understanding of themselves. Then you get the ripple effect through everything that they do. They then want to read more, they want to know more, they want to understand how to change policy and practice. Then you get the curiosity champions who are absolute drivers of change, who are the people who are saying, right, I can do this differently, right, I'm seeing this differently, right, I can think about this process differently. Then you get the policy change, then you get the implementation. It's got to be on this sort of systemic change process, but you've got to get buy-in from everybody, just like Justin said, from leaders of communities, from the PCCs, from the mayors, from whoever it is, right down to the people who are working on the front face, who are dealing with these problems every single day, right the way from the shopkeepers to the social workers, to the teachers, to everybody actually having a deeper level of understanding of themselves.
Big ask, Justin. So you're going back into a force consultant. What are you advising them to do to get the wheels turning on that journey that James just described?
Yeah, so I think the first stage is mandate, and get culture. This is about cultural shift. So, and we all know the evidence base tells us that to have a cultural shift, it's bottom up and top down. So it's getting the mandate from those system leaders in the in that environment, in this case policing. And the way we did it as part of Trauma Informed Lancashire was to get pledges. So I got those system leaders not only to pledge in a written format, but to video record them pledging. We put that onto our what was the Violence Reduction Unit website. Why? Because it shows that level of commitment, but it also shows to the staff that they lead that this is an important part of that organisational culture. So that mandate's really important. But I said it was top down, but it's also bottom up as well. And if you came on my Violence Reduction Unit on a Wednesday when I was working there, and we were all wearing jeans and a t-shirt from the 35 different partner agencies that were there, what you'd see is a commonality of approach, but not a loss of organisational identity. So what you would have seen is people coming together, talking about trauma-informed practice, but from a social work perspective, talking about trauma-informed practice from a probation perspective, talking about it from a policing perspective, with the end goal of making change that benefits the local community. But everyone's got the same goal. They've just got different ways of doing it within their own organisation. So that cultural change comes top down, but it also comes bottom up. And within that, you've then got the sort, I suppose, the importance of stories, because to bring all of this to life, there needs to be real life stories, both at strategic level. So we used to use the Lancashire County Council Chief Exec story, where she came to one of our training sessions, was actually only booked in for 45 minutes and stayed for 8 hours. And that night went away and started redoing policies and started making organisational change within a massive council area. So we use that, but you've then got stories that come from individual police officers, from individual probation officers, from individual social workers, talking about what a difference trauma-informed practice has made to their day-to-day working. And linked to that is, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say it in this environment, is evaluation. Because without independent evaluation, I can say all these good things, but I might be wrong. So actually that independent evaluation that tells another story, that says, this is the good bits, the not so good bits, this is the things that should change, and here's the plan to change, is really important. And certainly most of the violence reduction units, but most of the trauma-informed community have a plethora of evaluations that come with them. So if any folk are on the call today and want direct into any of the evaluations, we can help with that too.
Interesting. I'm tempted to ask about central places you can go for those evaluations, but I'm going to park that and hand over to Helen, who I think has got some of her own questions as well, some from the Q&A. So Helen.
Yeah, but I actually think that's a really good question. I've obviously put the Trace Hub Wales link in our chat, but actually if people are listening to this thinking, well, I want my organisation to go away and be trauma informed, where do they go? Is there a policing lead, for example, that's got a portfolio of resources that they can go to? Not everywhere has a VRU that might have some of these resources. Where would you advise somebody to go and look, first of all?
So the college, what was the College of Police and What Works site? We put nearly everything we had on there. And it's got a search function, so you can put in trauma-informed policing in it, and it comes up with stuff. If within the College of Policing website, they've also got the public health approaches subsection, and we put a lot of stuff in there. And under the public health approaches, we did a number of landscape reviews from 2018 to 2024, and all of those contained practice at a national level from all of the police forces of England and Wales, some of which were trauma-informed practice. Interestingly, some of them are called trauma-informed practice. Some of them were trauma-informed, but weren't necessarily called trauma-informed practice. So there's an interesting one there. And then speaking from a Lancashire point of view, if you go on the Trauma-Informed Lancashire website and click on resources, all of the evaluations of all the training and all the system-wide stuff and so on and so forth are all on there, and I'm sure it's similar for Jane. So most of the VRU community, well, all the VRU community have a website, and nearly all the evaluations are publicly published on those websites. So there will be a little bit of trawling to do. And then, of course, the Youth Endowment Fund is always useful because it's got the toolkit within there, and with that are links to resources and practice and so on and so forth.
Yeah, they've got 4 RCT is just finishing as well, I think, where the evaluations will be published really soon.
And if you
Jane,
look on,
anything else to add?
sorry, if you look on the College Policing website, there's an ongoing longitudinal study. I think it was 2019 to 20, and it reports in 2027, and that's all about trauma-informed policing. I think it's the University of Portsmouth, but don't quote me on that. If you go on the College Policing website, it's on there.
Yeah, I was just going to add the Merseyside Violence Reduction Partnership website, merseysidevrp.com. You will find all of the research on there, but you'll also find the 6-month research. I think there's a link on it, or you can go on bekindtraining.com, which also has the 6-month research of the impact of trauma-informed practice.
Wonderful.
Sorry, Helen, it was remiss of me to say as well, sorry, my fault, that we've just released a paper that was done jointly between the UK and Australia called Trauma-Informed Policing, a Scoping Review. And that was done between Melbourne University and Deakin University and the UK. And that looks at the benefits of trauma-informed policing, why it matters, what the challenges are, some recommendations and some directions towards practice as well. So if colleagues on the call want to have a look, if they just Google trauma-informed policing, a scoping review, it should come up.
Lovely. Well, we will make sure we send out links for all of those as well. If I could get you both to make sure you've sent me anything we've spoken about today. I do have a couple of questions, and we've got one in the chat as well. You've both spoken about the evaluation of this, and it's very clear there's evidence behind it. We often hear about economic evaluations and actually the cost saving, and you know, those who are trained in trauma awareness and trauma-informed practice will know that when you go out and deal with somebody in that way, you very often will solve that crime. So you're not going out to the same person time and time again. But for those that need reassuring of that, are those evaluations that you speak about speaking to that economic evaluation of the benefits of this approach?
So I actually saw Mark Bellis a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the impact of our adverse childhood experiences. And he was talking about 4 or more adverse childhood experiences and the cost per person per year, £6,000 per person per year. And UK-wide, that is 20.5 billion. Well, having trauma-informed policing isn't necessarily going to take away one of those ACEs, but having trauma-informed families, having trauma-informed regions might reduce that dramatically. And if everybody is working together, just taking one of those away is taking the cost away. But then you think about the sort of long-term impact. So 4 or more ACEs, you are 25% more likely to have impaired mobility. So we've got health issues there. You are 21% more likely to have impaired self-care, 53% more likely to have pain and discomfort, actually feel that pain within your body, and 78% more likely to suffer with anxiety and depression. Well, if everybody that you're coming across is trauma-informed, the chances of that happening actually reduce dramatically, which will have a massive impact on public health long-term, will have a massive impact on the productivity of the people that we're working with, on the outcomes for the people that we're working with, and hopefully reduce crime ultimately. But, you know, costings wise, we know that the European cost is 748 billion of ACEs. So unless we do something about it, from now, we're not going to change outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Jane. Justin, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, the World Health Organization has consistently said that dealing with ACEs and trauma is a public health emergency, and arguably it is. It's not getting any better, that's for sure. And you know, when you look at the evidence base that says if you've got 6 or more ACEs, you are likely to die 20 years earlier than the general population. Well, if that's not a business case for helping folk, I don't know what is, because it's the right thing to do. But certainly most of the BRUs engaged with John Moores University in some shape or form to look at the cost of serious violence to the health economy and the health sector. And they did a tabletop exercise and costed it per area. They did Wales first, and then they did Lancashire, and they did a few others. And you're talking multi-million pounds cost of serious violence. That's just one element to another sector, because if you hear the word serious violence, you normally think of policing and criminal justice, but actually it has a massive impact on lots of other sectors as well. So the cost benefit piece that we're talking about there is really important, I think, but it's really hard to cost prevention, because it's really hard to cost what you've stopped. So that's always been the perennial issue. And certainly within policing, I always remind folk about why we all joined the police in the first place. And pretty sure that most people in their interviews will have talked about the Peelian principles. And one of the first Peelian principles is the prevention of crime and disorder. So again, dealing with trauma, dealing with ACEs, upstream intervention, dealing with underlying causes will help us with that, and have not only an economic impact, but actually meets the whole fundamental reason why we joined policing in the first place, and the reason why policing is there.
Absolutely. I can see that's going to be a quote from this session, definitely, for LinkedIn. Right, I'm going to ask a question now from one of our audience members, Tom. And it's something I think we spoke about yesterday and previously. Do you find that trauma-informed practice has become a bit of a tick box? And Tom describes it being completely diluted. And we had a discussion, didn't we, about the language that gets used around trauma-informed practice. It's a real bugbear of mine, because most of the time it is trauma awareness rather than actually the informed practice that incorporates the whole system. And Tom says, really frustratingly, he's had to do a 12-month course to attain a practitioner status. And actually, a lot of the time it's these tick box 3-day courses. And I know in Wiltshire Police, when we were training, we could only do half days for officers because that's all they could be released for. How are we getting around that? What language should we be using? And do you think it is becoming a bit diluted because of the language we're using? And I'm going to put that to both of you to finish up.
Is it okay if I go? That's the only reason. So it's a real bugbear of mine that it's a tick box. It's a one and done. And I've had conversations with local authorities who say, yeah, we're totally trauma informed, when they've done a 2-hour session, or they've done an e-learning package, which was just literally a tick box. I was really worried about starting an e-learning package as part of our hybrid model. And I thought, they're just going to go click, 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 click. And it's not what I found at all. I found some police officers, without anyone watching over them, were doing 11 hours of training. We'd only suggested it was 3, but they were actually doubling and more, because they could go over things again, because they could look at things specifically. And it had videos and animation in it to try and keep people going, because there's nothing worse than an e-learning package that is just, I mean, I'm the worst person to teach, because everything has to meet the neuroscience of how we learn. Nothing can take more than 20 minutes without it swapping to something else, because actually you switch off. You totally lose focus if it's any more than 20 minutes. If it's somebody with a really dull monotone voice, you've lost them. If somebody just avoids all the videos and just says, no, that doesn't matter, just to get time to go faster, actually, you're not getting across the integrity of the training. And you can't send one person on the training and then expect that one person to disseminate that to everybody else, because you will dilute the content massively, which is why we suggested everybody had to do it. It was mandatory in Merseyside for staff to actually complete the course, and they had to complete session 1 and session 2 as an e-learning before they actually did the face-to-face. And actually, in 4,000 people, I've had 7,500 hours of learning. So it isn't a click, click, click with it's actually 7.8, but I'm not going to be pedantic. But unless you're going to get buy-in, you're going to get that kind of idea of it just has to be a tick box. I know I went in one school, I delivered the training, and the head teacher came up to me and he just said, the person who came in before petrified the life out of all of the staff. She gave absolutely nobody hope. If you do not train trauma-informed practice without hope, you aren't going to get the buy-in from people. If you're just going to give them all the facts and figures without the hope that actually there can be enormous trauma growth, that from that experience of trauma, you can actually really develop as a human being in a whole different way and just see life differently. Unless you're going to give people hope, you are just compounding compassion fatigue. So it has to be alongside it, and it has to be trained with a trauma-informed lens. As we were saying before, if you don't put the wraparound support in, then how do you just leave people afterwards just going, hold on a minute, you just told me all of that, how do I deal with it? So it has to be really in depth, and anybody who's saying it has to be a tick box has never done trauma-informed training properly.
Thanks, Jane. Justin?
I suppose when, particularly in a policing context, you start to look at the impact of trauma and what a massive impact it can make on policing on a day-to-day basis. The problem is that there's no national agreed model around trauma-informed practice for policing. And as Jane's alluded to, the training's inconsistent. Sometimes it's online, sometimes in person. Everyone's got different curricula and so on and so forth. Proving the effectiveness becomes a challenge, as we've alluded to already. But we know that we need to have that organisation and frontline change. Why? Because we know that trauma-informed practice will improve how we do victim care. And I think Tom's mentioned that in the chat around the victim code and the victim charter. But also on an evidential point of view, it will affect things like understanding trauma. We can then understand how it affects memory, how it affects behaviour, how it affects our investigation strategy, and so on and so forth. So actually, it helps us with understanding the future of investigations, as well as dealing with the future of how policing will deal with its community members. And we're in a massive change for policing, aren't we, at the moment? There's a whole plethora of change coming from everywhere. You know, and as a result, I would want to see trauma-informed practice as being a big part of that. And I know we talked the other day, Helen, when I was still serving, we brought all 20 violence reduction units together, and we asked them, how do we do this? What does it look like? And they did. We had a visual artist come along and basically drew out everything that everybody said. And these were all the experts from all the violence reduction units from all over England, Wales and Scotland. And they drew out this massive journey chart, which if I can, I'll share it on in the chat bar if I can. It wasn't working yesterday, but I'll try. But certainly in Lancashire, we then had that blown up and we put it in every single operational police station for folk to have a look at. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, you could see police officers looking at it, whether they saw it as a nice piece of art, whether they saw it as something that resonated with them or helped them. I don't know, but certainly people were looking at it. So understanding what it means to policing, I think, is really important. And there's a real role for the college there, which Tom's alluded to in his chat.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to get you both, if you can, to respond to Tom and Eleanor's question, because I think there's a couple in Eleanor's. Because I think they're really important and they need a bit more time than the 2 minutes I have left. So I don't want to rush the responses on those. Brilliant questions, by the way. Thank you for everyone that put one in. Thank you both so much. I feel like this conversation can easily be multiple days, let alone 1 hour. Hopefully it sparked something for the people that maybe are just starting their journey with trauma-informed practice, trauma awareness, or for those who are already in it and experiencing some challenges. It's given them some ideas of how they can overcome it. I think one key thing I've taken away is it has to be a partnership approach. It has to come top down, bottom up for it to be successful, let alone all the intricacies that then come with it as well. I have a link to our evaluation form. Please can you fill that in for us? It's really important so that we can continue to deliver these sessions. I will email it out for everybody as well. This session will be uploaded onto our members hub, so it's free to join please make sure you do, and then you can access this session, all our previous ones, and our future ones when they get put on there. Thank you both, Jane, Justin, really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today.